So it looks like we have a new contender for my favorite Fujifilm lens, and it's this 35mm f1.4. So for those of you who don't know, I picked up this 35 1.4 earlier this year, and I've been using it mostly for street photography in and around London, and also for some work, so some portraits and some product and food photography as well. Let's not waste any more time and get straight into the review. And the first thing I want to talk about is the price. So this 35 1.4 comes in at around £500. I picked mine up at about £480, and I've seen some prices at £550 and £520. So depending on what shop you go to, the price can vary quite a bit, but it's around the £500 mark. Compared to the 35 f2, that comes in at around £350 to £380. So this is the more expensive 35mm option from Fujifilm, and it's also worth noting that in the near future, Fujifilm are going to be releasing a 33mm f1.4 lens as well. Next up, let's talk about the build, design and feel of this 35 1.4. And to be honest, I like the design of these older Fujifilm lenses compared to the f2s. And also, when I'm doing street photography around central London, it's much easier to hold the camera with a wider lens like this than it is with the narrower f2 lenses. That said, the f2 lenses are a bit lighter and they're also weather resistant, so it's worth keeping that in mind. But design wise, I really like it. And also, I don't normally like lens hoods, but the lens hood on this 35 1.4 does look nice, and it just adds to that retro look. And when paired with the X Pro 2, I think it just makes a nice unit, and yeah, I think it's a good look in general. Okay, so let's get on to the important part of this review and talk image quality when it comes to the 35 f1.4. And in my opinion, this is where this lens is a cut above the 35 f2. And I say that as somebody who loves using the 35 f2 and I use it on a regular basis. But this 35 f1.4 has something different about it. So one of the strange things about this lens is when Fujifilm were making this lens, and there's a really good article about this which I'll drop down in the description below, but they stated that they wanted to make a lens with a magic touch and not a lens which performs perfectly in the tests and in the charts and when you zoom in 400% the pixel peep. So yeah, this Fujifilm f1.4 is unique when it comes to Fujifilm lenses, and in my opinion, from looking at the shots I'm taking with it, I totally agree with what Fujifilm said. So from my experience from using this 35 1.4 for the last 2 to 3 months, I'd say that the shots taken with it have a bit more of an old school film look to them. The micro contrast is a bit different from what you find in the f2, and also the colors are a bit more punchy. And secondly, the way the focus area rolls off into the autofocus area is a lot more smooth compared to the 35 f2, which is a bit more clinical. Now it does sound like I'm being a bit harsh on the 35 f2. I'm not. That is a lens I do love using, but they are different, and I own both and I will be using them in the future, but they will be used for different things. But back to the image quality, the bokeh, so the autofocus areas look really nice on this 35 1.4. So if you're doing portrait photography or product photography, this lens will come in handy there too. When it comes to sharpness, again, I don't really pixel peep and I don't really zoom in 400% to check how sharp images are. It's something in my opinion which is really overrated when it comes to reviewing lenses. But as with all Fujifilm lenses, the images come out sharp and I've not really had any issues in that department. One thing to note is when you're shooting wide open at f1.4, the corners can be a bit soft, but again, in my opinion, that adds to the character of the image, and it's not really something I'd count as a negative against this lens. So yeah, image quality wise, I'm really happy with this. And it's a strange thing because I love using the 35 f2, but now that I've started using the 35 f1.4, I'm preferring the images coming in out of this lens to that one. Okay, so with the positives out the way, let's talk about some of the things I don't like about this 35 f1.4. And the first thing to note is this lens isn't weather sealed. So those of you who've been following this channel for a while now would know that I love shooting in the rain, and having a lens which is weather sealed and a camera body which is weather sealed is really important to me. And this lens isn't weather sealed, so it's one of those things where before I head out, I have to check the weather forecast and make sure we don't have rain on the horizon. That said, when I did first get this lens, I took it out in the snow and I shot in the snow for a couple of hours and nothing happened to it. So I'm sure there is some resistance in there, but when it comes to warranty and stuff, you don't really want to risk it. And therefore in the future, if it's raining or if I'm expecting bad weather, I'll take the 35 f2 with me instead. Second up, when you're walking around with this lens, if you've got continuous autofocus on, the lens makes a load of noise. So it makes a clicking noise when it's focusing or hunting for focus. So if you have continuous autofocus on, it just clicks non-stop and moves in and out non-stop. And that's another thing to note. So when you're focusing with the 35 1.4, the front element, so the front of the lens here, it moves in and out. So if you have your lens up against the window, watch out for that because you don't want to damage the lens or the motors inside. As for the autofocusing, it is slow when you compare it to the 35 f2 or any of Fujifilm's f2 lenses. And it's one of those things where it kind of changes how you shoot. With the f2 lenses, I can move faster, shoot faster. So I'm moving around quicker, focusing, moving, shooting. Whereas with the 35 f1.4, I need to slow down how I do some of my photography. And it reminds me of the 56 f1.2, where in order to focus, you have to be a bit more patient and you have to be a bit more accurate. But it's one of those things where once I got used to using the 35 1.4 and the autofocus, I didn't really have any problems with it whatsoever. And I didn't really have any problems even tracking fast subjects moving through the frame or subjects moving towards me. But the sound is something definitely to note. So if you are shooting in a quiet place or in public transport, shooting with this lens can be a bit inconvenient. So one thing to note when using this 35 1.4 is you probably need to use electronic shutter, and that's because when you're shooting wide open at daytime, the shutter speed on all of the Fujifilm cameras probably won't be able to keep up, especially if it's a sunny day. So make sure you go into the menu and turn on mechanical shutter plus electronic shutter, and that way when you're shooting, if you're on a sunny day and the shutter speed can't keep up, you'll use the electronic shutter instead. But that said, when you're using the electronic shutter, do beware, because if you're shooting a fast moving object, sometimes the lines can bend a bit. And also, something I found was when you're shooting in bright light under harsh sunlight, sometimes the subjects can have a red line around them, like a weird red halo, which is quite hard to take out in post. So that is something worth remembering, and it may be a good idea to get a variable ND filter to stick on the front of this when you're doing street photography at daytime. So there are a couple of other lenses with the same focal length from Fujifilm which are worth considering before you pick up this 35 f1.4. The first major one is the 35 f2. Now the 35 f2 is one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses. It's a lens I've used all the time and I've traveled around the world with. So the 35 f2 is smaller, it's lighter, the autofocusing is a lot quicker, it's better for video, and it's also weather sealed. So it's hard to decide between the f1.4 and the f2 versions. I own both, and in my opinion it is worth actually having both because you can use both lenses in very different situations. So the bottom line when it comes to this Fujifilm 35 f1.4 is it's a great lens, and to be honest, it's fast becoming one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses. I know I've said that in a couple of reviews already, and Fujifilm set out to make a lens which has character and isn't a technically perfect lens, and I think they did succeed with this. Yeah, it doesn't have the weather resistance, it's a bit slow and it's a bit noisy, but for all those things you do have the f2 model instead. But in all, I'm happy with this lens. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the 35 f1.4. So if you already have the lens, drop a comment down below and tell me about it. Or if you have any questions about this lens, again, drop them in the comments below and I'll make sure to get back to you. And massive thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And also remember to hit the subscribe button too. A massive thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.